Now, here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Coming up, 1 in 3 risk of blackouts in Victoria over summer. What does the shadow Energy and Climate Change Minister Mark Butler make of the news from the energy market operator and the government's accusation that Labor is on the side of the big energy companies that need a big stick to keep them in line? G20 wraps up with a communique and a 90-day reprieve on Donald Trump's tariff hike. All the reaction of those trade-exposed stocks here in Australia with Forager Funds' Steve Johnson. And the start-up putting common sense into community care. Mable is on a mission to connect the right carers with the elderly and those needing disability support to deliver a step change in affordable, flexible, quality care in Australia. Mable's Peter Scutt talks to us about this really important gap in the market. Well, what a lot there must have been taxing the mind of our Prime Minister Scott Morrison as he jetted back into Australia today. On the plus side, he got his one-on-one with Donald Trump in Buenos Aires, which is more than Vladimir Putin managed. And trade tensions have subsided a little as the US president kicks the can out for 90 days. But the machinations within the Liberals while he's been away leaves us all thinking that 2019 risks being a slow train wreck for the party, both at state and federal levels. The latest scuffle came over the weekend with former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull intervening on the government's decision to avoid a pre-selection battle for MP Craig Kelly for his seat of Hughes, the one not far from the Prime Minister's. Made front-page news in The Australian today. Well, now Craig Kelly is well known on Sky News as having views on climate change rather similar to Tony Abbott's, or perhaps even stronger. Well, on Sunday night, Malcolm Turnbull tweeted he'd heard that Mr Kelly had threatened to go to the crossbench and bring down the government. If indeed he has made this threat, he said it's not one that should result in capitulation. Indeed, it would be the worst and weakest response to such a threat. The strategy behind this, apparently, is that if Mr Kelly were to move to the crossbenches, that would force Scott Morrison's hand to hold an earlier federal election in, say, February. Mr Turnbull's view is that Scott Morrison is being utterly selfish and, as he puts it, wanting to keep his arse in the Commonwealth car for as long as possible, whereas Mr Turnbull sees the writing on the wall for the Morrison government. But that shouldn't mean that poor old Gladys Berejiklian should be collateral damage in the upcoming March state election.
I am very concerned, as many members of the New South Wales Liberal Party are, that the brand damage to the party, which arose from the leadership change in August, when I was removed as Prime Minister, and that has been considerable damage to the Liberal Party's brand as a result of that. We've seen that taken out in a state by-election in Wagga. We've seen it obviously in Wentworth, and we've seen it in the Victorian state election. I am very concerned that this will put at risk the Berejiklian government. So from the point of view of a very good state government with real achievements and a terrific track record, it would be better if the federal government were to go before the 23rd of March. Now, as it happens, my intention as Prime Minister was to go to the polls on the 2nd of March, so in effect straight after the summer holidays.
Well, there he was this morning outside his house. Now, in the end today, Malcolm Turnbull lost his bid to upend the government after a majority of Liberals voted to support Craig Kelly's endorsement. But all this is an absolute gift for Labor, isn't it? It leaves the shortened team looking really quite commanding in comparison. Here's Shadow Finance Minister Jim Chalmers on Sky News today, who described the government as a steaming pile of resentment and get squares.
I mean, this is more fuel on the Liberals' dumpster fire of chaos and division and dysfunction. And I think what Malcolm Turnbull said this morning really probably reflects the view of the broader community, which is that the Liberal Party, is spiralling out of control. And the only way to resolve the deep internal divisions in the Liberal Party is to change the government, to give them a spell in opposition. So I think he was reflecting a pretty common view.
A spell in opposition. Well, what is quite clear, I think, is that Malcolm Turnbull is now a player in the upcoming election, if anybody doubted that, and one that Scott Morrison needs like a hole in the head. Well, let's keep with domestic politics, with the Prime Minister back on his feet, straight into question time this afternoon. Joining me with all the latest insights, Sky News political reporter Annalise Nielsen. Annalise, you yourself have been in the hot seat presenting today, and I know you spoke to Jim Chalmers as well. But what are the developments this afternoon?
Well, it has continued to unfold today, but we did see the New South Wales Liberal Party in the end endorse Craig Kelly, along with a number of other Liberal MPs that were up for another election, and they were receiving that endorsement without having to go to the party membership. Now, that's what had former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull concerned about the process. He wanted it to go out to the people. He says that was off the back of reports that Craig Kelly was threatening to go to the crossbench. Now, last week, Craig Kelly was adamant that he was a loyal Liberal. He was walking around Parliament in a T-shirt emblazoned with the former head of the Liberal Party, Robert Menzies, the father of the party. But when he was pushed on what he would do if he wasn't pre-selected, he was quite circumspect. So it did seem like that was hanging over the Liberal Party's head, and that's something that Malcolm Turnbull seems to have taken umbrage with. We've had a number of people say that Malcolm Turnbull's been chased down for comment. It's worth noting that he went on Twitter last night. He posted that Twitter thread, and then he went on Radio National this morning, and that was before those cameras were out in his driveway.
Yeah, all right. Well, what does this all mean for the timing of the election now?
Well, the government has said that they want the election around May because they want to be able to hand down a budget in April, but it was former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull who was saying that he thinks it should go earlier. It should be before the state election in New South Wales because it shouldn't impact it. It's an interesting argument because one will undoubtedly feed into the other, regardless of who goes first, and it's impossible that there wouldn't be that bleed through of federal issues to state level, as we saw with the Victorian state election. But he was saying that he was planning on going to an election around March 2nd. That's the first time we've ever heard that, so that was an interesting point. But when Matthias Cormann was asked about the same point today, this is what he had to say.
Well, I've got to say, I was then, as I am now, the leader of the government in the Senate. I was not aware of a final decision having been made in relation to the timing of the election in 2019. I certainly was aware that various options were being contemplated, which is not unusual, but I'm certainly not aware that a final decision had been made in relation to the timing of the election under Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister.
Right, well, everybody's putting in their 2 cents worth. I gather the Trade Minister, Simon Birmingham, also had something to say about it too.
Oh, he absolutely did, and this has become the problem that the Liberal Party is facing, is that there is a lot of mixed messages coming from their camp. There's a lot of people coming out and disagreeing with other members, and so something like this, which should be a very straightforward message, we're now seeing conflicting messages. This is what Trade Minister Simon Birmingham had to say.
Well, the government will have an election in the normal course of events. As I just said, we're entering the final 6-month period. So from here on in, we're in the normal time frame for elections. But what we want to see is an election held next year in the normal course of events. And of course, we'll be making sure that Australians understand that it's going to be held off the back of a government that has balanced the budget, delivered strong economic growth.
Now, Ticky, this is just the latest issue that the Liberal Party is having to deal with. There's only a few days left of sitting before the end of the year, and any guess they wouldn't have to come back until next February. But this is the latest issue after Julia Banks deferred to the crossbench. They've lost their majority in the lower house. They're trying to get some legislative wins through the lower house, including changes to encryption laws. But so far, everything seems to have been dominated by these internal conflicts.
Right, well, it's very, very messy, isn't it? Annalise Nielsen, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. Well, as we've just been talking about, concerns are growing in some Liberal circles that the New South Wales state government under Premier Gladys Berejiklian may be under serious challenge in the March election, notwithstanding the undignified departure of the former state Labor leader Luke Foley and notwithstanding the strong economic record the Premier has built. While the feds don't help, part of it is the optics of some of the infrastructure projects the government is rolling out, including the light rail. That's got dreadful optics. How long has it been bedlam on George Street? Well, we thought we'd take a look at Sydney through the property development and infrastructure lens. A short time ago, I spoke with Dr Shane Geha, founding and managing director of real estate investments fund GE. Dr Shane Geha, it's great to have you in the studio. We've got a state election in New South Wales around the corner. What do you think the messages were from the Victorian election?
Well, of course, there are always complex and lots of messages, but I would say that infrastructure is very important to both of the big states in Australia, to Victoria and New South Wales. And I think you can't underestimate the productivity gains, Ticky, that come from these big, beautiful, useful infrastructure projects for us and for the Victorians.
And of course, into all this is the whole population agenda, which has become quite controversial in our big cities, with Gladys Berejiklian here making her feelings known. What do you think about the population agenda?
Well, the Premier is reacting, I think, in the way we generally can react to increased congestion and problems with growth. So we're kind of victims of our own success. It's nice to be that popular. It's nice to be ranked 1, 2 or 3 in the world for most years. So
but we had this situation where Mike Baird did this sort of asset recycling, did a lot of selling of assets, and everyone was on a high really in New South Wales. Now there seems to be more sort of cynicism around all this infrastructure development and population.
Because, of course, the reality is it takes time to build all this stuff. So it's very important to build it, but it does take time to build it. And it's a bit like the person next door to you, the woman next door building her house, and you've got to suffer for 1.5 years with the banging and the clanging and the dust and the noise. And you just, all you can think about is that your life is miserable. But actually it's temporary, and eventually that'll all finish. And the great advantage is that eventually you'll have a very nice house next door, or in our case, a very nice 33-kilometre tunnel that takes you under Parramatta Road.
Right, OK. Well, the light rail, on the other hand, that's more than 1.5 years. I mean, people have been waiting, will have been waiting for years and years to fix this thing. It's blown out. It seems to have been spectacularly mismanaged in terms of the commissioning of this business. How do you see the light rail story ending?
Well, the light rail will be finished one way or another, as all of these projects ultimately have to be. The thing with the light rail is that because there are so many people temporarily suffering, it makes headlines. And of course, these people are all genuinely aggrieved, and we understand that.
And it's marquee. It's George Street. I mean, George Street has been out of commission for, I don't know, months and months and months.
For months. And it's ugly and it's horrible, and you're walking in holes and potholes. But at the end of the day, there are thousands of students at the university and people that go to the SCG and the racecourse and Randwick Plaza who will all benefit greatly from having this connection to Central Station. Yeah. In terms of you know, because you work very much in the sort of rezoning space, when you look at a light rail situation like that, obviously it's going to make a huge difference once it is completed. Equally, what do you think about how much should have been known about what was under the ground in terms of developing? Certainly more than this, and I think it is very easy to say let's shift the blame somewhere else, but at the end of the day this is kind of everybody's problem. It's not just the governments, it's not just the contractors, it's the commuters, it's the shop owners, it's everybody's problem. So at the end of the day, if there was information that we could have told anybody that would have made this job a little bit less difficult in terms of the underground services, but sometimes, you know, these projects are complex. There's a lot of stuff under the ground, so you can get it wrong. I've done lots of big projects and involved in lots of big projects where the drawings are completely wrong. You look at the drawings that tell you services are here, they end up being somewhere else, they end up being 4 times the size. But I'm looking forward to when it finishes. And
what about these big projects being built seemingly all at the same, you know, the entire project is being worked on all over the city at the same time, rather than doing a chunk, upsetting a certain amount of people for some time, then doing the next chunk. Is there a way to go about this?
I think certainly from many perspectives, doing these projects over a longer period of time would have been more helpful. I'll tell you why. For instance, the price of concrete, just take an example, would be 20% higher currently than it should be, because the demand for it is at capacity. So if we weren't building 18 projects at the same time, but don't get me wrong, I love 18 projects. It's wonderful for the state. It's good for us to have good new infrastructure everywhere. But the cost to the government is probably 20 or 30% higher than it could have otherwise been in both labour and material if they were more staggered. Sometimes there are political reasons why you want to do them sooner. Sometimes there are technical reasons why you want to do them sooner. And don't forget that we are doing catch-up as well. There was a long period of time in New South Wales where we didn't do too many of these projects for various reasons, some good, some not. But I think it was just a relief that we're finally catching up. And here we are, we're catching up, and we've got all of the pains of having not just the person next door building, but the person on the other side, the person behind us, the street in front of us, and the house across the road all building at the same time.
So looking at Western Sydney and indeed the whole three cities concept, the new airport, the second airport, how has that changed property, opportunity, development and rezoning in the West now?
Well, it's changed those values upwards forever. So the third airport, the second airport, the second airport with its 2 planned runways, well, is actually probably the first time I've seen, certainly the federal government, but maybe most governments, do genuine nation building. And nation building is building today what you will need tomorrow. So what it's done, it's taken sort of land that's empty and fallow and has lots of open space that's currently being underutilised and transforming it through a multi-billion-dollar program. And it's the feds who had to pour in the money to do this. The states don't have this budget, and it's going to transform the city into a 2-airport city instead of a 1-airport city that can only be great for productivity. It will help the nation, it'll help exports. We're going to get a lot of new technology businesses that are all going to co-locate right next to the airport. That will absolutely happen, in my view. It will be the transformation.
And increasing values. I mean, very much your space, as you say, in the area where this infrastructure is developed, increasing land value.
Some of that farmland, if you'd bought it 15 years ago, that would have been the last project you would have had to buy because you would have tripled your money.
Wow. What about in a city and the high-density building that's going on in places like Green Square? Do you think that we're going to get a backlash to the intensity? Because I think my understanding is that it's as dense as, or planning to be as dense as, New York City, Manhattan. Now, should we be doing that?
Well, a lot of people object to density, and I understand why, because their view is we're too clamoured, it's too cluttered. But actually, Sydney, by world standards, is not very dense. So we have about 400 people per square kilometre, 407, depending on which metropolitan area you use, people per square kilometre. That's about 1/5 of the density of Paris. It's about 1/6 of the density of London.
But again, it's rethinking public transport and not everyone having a car. And
Right, but density actually helps public transport, and you actually need the people to have the tax base to pay for the public transport. Because in a first world economy, which is what ours is, and a first world city like ours, if you build second grade or third grade public transport, no one will use it. So you've actually got to build first world public transport, you've got to pay for it, and as you pay for it, it goes on the credit card. Now, if you don't have enough people in that 20 to 60 age group in the tax base to pay for the services that you're going to build, you'll end up with a credit card bill that's virtually unfixable in the long term.
So finally, the other side of all this is taxes, land taxes, changes to negative gearing, all those sorts of policy issues. What is your hope for how land and development will be affected?
My hope is that property actually ends up with less taxation rather than more. It seems to be a hobby horse.
Shouldn't have asked it that way. Of course,
but it's a hobby horse of many. But do you realise, sadly, that on an $800,000 apartment, which is an average price on the market today in Sydney, something like 1/3 of that, $240,000, is fees and charges between the 3 tiers of government. And we're already thinking of increasing the affordable housing levy. By the way, all of these are justified on one level or another. It's understandable.
But a shift away from stamp duty to land tax, for example.
I think if you broaden the land tax base and put it on everybody and went all around the city, like some American cities do, it could work actually to create more equity, because then you could have less imposition on transactional taxes, reduce those up front for newcomers. And actually then there will be greater acceptability of increased ratepayers coming to pay.
And do you think that's politically achievable?
Hard. I'm only talking economics. Yeah.
All right, Dr Shane Geha, it's really interesting to get your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ticky.
After the break, Shadow Energy and Climate Change Minister Mark Butler will join me to discuss the ALP's energy plan next.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Yes, welcome back. Well, a clear set of policy choices seem to be now emerging in the lead up to next year's federal election, don't they? But no more so than in energy. Labor has recently put forward its energy policy, which includes a return to something remarkably like the original NEG, which is what got thrown out by the Turnbull government thanks to all the infighting, and notwithstanding its broad support from business. Well, today, Energy Minister Angus Taylor has been quick to jump on the energy market operators' warning that Victorians will face the risk of 1 in 3 that there will be blackouts over the Christmas period, and he's staunchly defending his right to hold a big stick to the energy companies, which he says Labor is cozying up to. Well, joining me to talk Labour's energy policy is Mark Butler, Shadow Energy and Climate Change Minister. Mark, it's good to talk to you there. Now, first, can I ask you about the market operators' news on the risk of these blackouts? Surely that would be a concern to both sides of Parliament.
Of course, and the market operator, I think, has been doing really good work over the last couple of years to ensure that in those summer months when demand really does go very high because of the prevalence of air conditioning, all those great things we have in our society now, to make sure that there isn't going to be unserved demand. So they have this thing called the RERT, which allows the market operator effectively to buy a demand response to periods of peak demand where there might not be enough supply in the system. And in addition to that, we know, for example, there are some emergency diesel generators in the South Australian system that will also be able to kick in the event that there is this this unserved demand that the AEMO has talked about in their report today. But it just goes back really to the importance of having an energy policy that's going to pull through enough investment. I mean, yes, Hazelwood closed, but there will be other coal generators close in coming years. 75% of our existing thermal generators are already operating beyond their design life. It just goes back to reinforce the importance of a bipartisan energy policy to ensure we have enough supply in the system. Well,
I think the government would jump on you pretty quickly there and say, well, no, this goes to the issue of reliability, which is where Labor have, in a way, got us into this problem in the first place by having this very high emissions reduction target, by pushing renewables at the expense of dispatchable power into the market too fast. This is how we've got ourselves into this mess, and they would say that they are now preparing us with reliable, dispatchable, underwritten, firming up the renewables side, a much better plan for reliability.
Except it's very difficult to see where the new investment is going to come with the demise of the National Energy Guarantee. I mean, the problem is that the supply-demand balance has become too finely balanced, if you like. What everyone says in the energy market, and experts and academics who look closely at this market will tell you, is we need more supply into the system. Now, of course, we also need investment in firming technology, like more pumped hydro, battery technology, gas peaking plant, and the like, and that really, I think, is going to be the very big challenge for the decade of the 2020s as more renewable energy comes into the system.
Yeah, if I just pick you up there, we need more supply, but we need more dispatchable supply. So unless you're going to firm up that renewable energy, simply by tipping more and more renewable energy in, you're going to hollow out your coal-fired plants, you're going to create more of an unstable grid, more of this anarchy that Kerry Schott talks about. How are you going to assure Australians that they won't be having blackouts, and indeed in South Australia as well?
Well, that was the point I was starting to make, Ticky, that the big challenge over the coming decade particularly is to get enough firming technology into the system so that when we do have a system that's more reliant upon intermittent renewable energy, and we will, everyone accepts that that is the future of generation investment, that there is firming technology into the system. And that's why the National Energy Guarantee was such an important proposal for the Parliament to consider, because it brought in the reliability obligation on the one hand, so a market signal that did ensure there was going to be enough firming technology in the market, but also on the other hand a generation investment signal that would give investors the confidence to put the very substantial amounts of money onto the table to start to renew our ageing, increasingly unreliable generation infrastructure. And you can't just have half of it. That's what the government's trying to do, effectively to continue work on the reliability obligation, work that we support. It's good as far as it goes, but without that market signal, that investment signal for new generation, we're really only half doing the job.
Does Labor take any responsibility for not having supported the Turnbull government when they were trying to get this across the line?
Well, we did. We made it very clear, Bill Shorten, Chris Bowen and I made it very clear that this was a model we could work with. There obviously were some conditions that we placed on the legislation. We made that very clear up front. But in those final days of Malcolm Turnbull's Prime Ministership, if this legislation had been allowed to be put to a vote in the Parliament, I suspect it would have got in the order of 140 votes, maybe 135 votes.
So Labor would definitely have voted for it
in the House of Representatives. Yes, we made our position clear that there was a difference between the two major parties on levels of ambition. But what investors had been telling me and the rest of the Labor team that was whether that's investors or energy companies themselves, what we needed for investor certainty was an agreement around the rules. They recognised there was not going to be agreement between the major parties around levels of ambition, but they said to me that they could price for that risk in the same way they price for the risk involved in commodity price movements or currency movements and such like. They could price for the risk involved in changing targets. They couldn't price for the risk in not knowing what the rules were at all. And we got so close. We really did just get so close.
Yes, we sure did. And
business was supporting it.
Yeah, well, business was supporting it too, of course. Now, on the other side,
business organisation. Scott Morrison said he had not come across a proposal in his 10 years in Parliament that had a broader base of support than the National Energy Guarantee. And it's gone up in a puff of smoke.
Well, moving on, one of the other areas, and of course, the question time, the government has come right back. They're calling your policy carbon tax on steroids. And so I'm going to move now to the cost side of the argument. This NEG, how much will it reduce power prices by? I mean, you've said in the order of $550, but doesn't that assume a RET of much lower than 45%?
And what we know also, though, I mean, that $550 figure, Ticky, comes from the modelling from the Energy Security Board about the National Energy Guarantee, as you know. What they interestingly did say
but
also...
But not at 45%.
Yeah, and I'll come to that. But what the modelling also said is that failure to implement the National Energy Guarantee would see bills go up by almost $300. And we already see that in the futures market for 2019, which has increased, or prices in the futures market have increased by about 40% just in the last several months because of the increased uncertainty. But the question about different targets is an important one, Ticky, and we have modelling provided by Reputex, a very reputable energy analytics firm out of Melbourne, that indicates that a higher target would see wholesale power prices, particularly from about 2022 onwards through the next decade, as much as 25% lower than the 26% target. And that just reflects our experience right now, which is putting more renewables into the system is pushing downward pressure on wholesale power prices.
But not to the extent that, not to the $550 extent. And you mentioned the fact that
that's additional to the $550.
Hang on, wait a minute. You said that prices would go up if you didn't have an NEG. Well, but that doesn't include the government's position now, which is to have this big stick and to force energy companies to bring the prices down. Now, surely they will deliver on price.
Well, of course, they've shown no modelling to indicate that that is actually going to have any effect on power prices going down. You'd think that after having conducted an exhaustive inquiry for 12 or 18 months, that if the consumer watchdog, the ACCC, thought this was going to be in the interests of consumers, they would have recommended the big stick or the divestment power, and they didn't. As you know, Ticky, they considered it and did not recommend a divestment power, in the same way that Ian Harper did not recommend a divestment power in his competition policy review. There's no indication this is going to do anything other than create further investor uncertainty, which will lead to power prices going up. We've already seen this because of the investor uncertainty created by Malcolm Turnbull being toppled along with the NEG. As I said, futures prices are going up.
Yes, yes. Well, I was going to say, business again is written in. Obviously, they too are concerned about investment certainty. But here we are, a few months out from an election. Clearly, the sensitivity around power prices, the government thinks is overwhelming. They've put this big stick in, notwithstanding the fact that the ACCC thinks you don't need it, for the same reason, presumably, that they were wrong-footed over the Royal Commission into banking, and they feel that given the profits being made last year and predicted this year by the big companies, that a big stick is needed to translate profits into lower prices.
Well, I'm not sure it's right to infer from the ACCC's report that they simply thought the government didn't need it. I think it's more reasonable to infer that the ACCC thought that it would actually do damage, in the same way that the Harper Policy Review thought that this sort of power, used in the hands of a treasurer without judicial review, there are a whole lot of very serious questions about the way in which this power is being developed, will actually do damage. Not that it won't do any good, but it will actually do damage to the market, which will be borne by consumers.
So if you were in government, you would not use the big stick?
Well, we've said we'll be opposing the legislation when it's finally introduced into the Parliament. We think probably this week. I mean, this has been a real rush job. A whole lot of people have not been able to have a look at this legislation, including some seasoned journalists who've wanted to have a look at it and kick the tyres on it. And this has been, it's lacked transparency. It's been very rushed. There are very serious constitutional legal questions as far as we know of the power, at least. And I think, again, a complete failure to provide any evidence base that this will do anything other than harm to the electricity market.
Well, a lot to go on this week. Mark Butler, I thank you so much for your time putting Labor's position forward. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
All right, well, after the break, George Bush Sr. dies at age 94 this last week. We'll reflect on the former president's legacy with Tom Switzer, Executive Director, the Centre for Independent Studies, next.
This is Ticky on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Yes, welcome back. Well, the end of an era in the United States with the great George Bush Sr. passing away, leaving a very important legacy, reaching back, I think, all the way to World War II. Here's the PM.
I rise on indulgence to acknowledge the passing of the Honourable George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st President of the United States. George Bush lived a remarkable life. He was a congressman, the first American envoy to China, Director of the CIA, Vice President of the United States, President of the United States, father of a president. George Bush was a great friend and true friend of Australia. From his days as a serviceman in the Pacific Theatre to his time as President working with Prime Ministers Hawke and Keating on the formation of the modern APEC. He was part of what was to become known as the greatest generation. The generation of men and women who fought and served during the Second World War to provide the world that we have today.
Well, joining me now to talk about the Bush legacy is Centre for Independent Studies Chief Executive Tom Switzer from our Sydney studio. And Tom, look, you've had a bit of time to think about this, I guess. You've wrote a really interesting piece on George Bush, and you were talking really about his realpolitik. Really, it's not an ideology, and how that stopped the expansionist mentality. Just explain a little bit about that for me.
Well, he managed the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union in a very deft way, Ticky. I mean, at the time, it's hard to believe this, but Bush was slammed by both liberals on the left and conservatives on the right for not celebrating the downfall of the Berlin Wall in late 1989 and then the subsequent dismantling of the Soviet Union. And his argument all along was that in victory magnanimity, as Winston Churchill put it, that is, there's no point in grinding your defeated foe's face in the dirt, because that could only rebound in unintended ways. And usually when empires collapse, they're very bloody affairs. You think of the British withdrawal from Kenya or Malaysia, the French withdrawal from Vietnam and Algeria, the Portuguese withdrawal from East Timor, the Belgian withdrawal from Congo. They're always very bloody, messy affairs. the collapse of the Soviet Union was a very peaceful affair, and a lot of that has to do with the prudent statesmanship of George H.W. Bush.
He was, of course, you know, the man at the centre of the toppling of Saddam Hussein as well.
Well, he certainly opposed the Iraqi regime's takeover of Kuwait in August of 1990, and he led a multinational coalition to liberate Kuwait from Saddam Hussein. But he drew ire from many people on the left and the right, including our own Prime Minister Paul Keating, who claimed that he didn't finish the job. But Bush Sr. was a completely different breed from Bush Jr. He recognised limits to American power. He recognised that if America helped bring down Saddam Hussein's regime, it would lead to loss as well as gain, and was fraught with the danger of unintended consequences. And as we've seen since the downfall of Saddam 2003, which Bush Sr. privately opposed, it's had all sorts of negative impacts across the region.
Right. No, that's very interesting. Now, one other area I think is fascinating is the role he had with Paul Keating and indeed Bob Hawke, in all the great reforms of that era, which we're still living on. Now, what sort of role did he have?
Well, people forget this, but at the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Empire, there was a fear that America would turn inward-looking, in a sense, a bit like Trump's America is turning inward-looking now. I don't quite accept that argument, but nevertheless, that's a widely held view, and that Bush's America would become more isolationist, inward-looking, and even protectionist. But Bush was an internationalist. He strongly believed in the importance of military and strategic alliances, and one of the big things that Hawke and Bush did in the late 80s and early 1990s was give voice to APEC, the Asia-Pacific trading community, and of course that got a new lease on life once Paul Keating replaced Bob Hawke in late 91, early 1992. So Bush and Hawke and Keating, of course, they're from different parties. Bush was a Republican, he's a mainstream centre-right, whereas the others were Labor politicians, but nevertheless they were united on a lot of those key trade issues.
Yeah. So finally, how do you think he will go down in history, particularly amongst Americans?
Well, look, he was a one-term president. You know, he succeeded Ronald Reagan, another Republican who had 2 terms, and he was defeated by Bill Clinton, who at the time was, you know, a draft-dodging, womanising, marijuana smoking governor of a backwater state in Arkansas. Yeah, and so his legacy in the initial period after his demise was pretty bad, but I think history's been very kind to George H.W. Bush. He was a statesman, and he was a fundamentally decent guy, and he had a very impressive foreign policy resume, and I think he'll be missed by both sides of politics greatly over the course of the next week.
Tom, so it's great to get your insights. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Ticky.
All right, well, let's head back to Australia now. Some of you may have caught our coverage of the Duke of York out here about a fortnight ago with his Pitch at Palace challenge for Aussie startups. The Sydney pitch was in the Opera House, attended by former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Lucy Turnbull, both of whom have a passion for this space. Well, one company pitching, which actually made it through to the final Aussie boot camp in Brisbane late last week, was Mable. Well, what is Mable? Well, founder and CEO Peter Scutt has come into the studio to tell us all about it. Peter, nice to have you in the studio.
Thank you very much. It's
so
lovely to be here.
You've got how many different startups were in Pitch at Palace? Just remind me. Loads.
In Sydney about 17.
Yes.
Of which about 8 went through to the final and the boot camp in Brisbane.
Yes.
I think they had the pitch on tour, as they called it, around 5 cities. So there were about 40 startups in Brisbane last week.
So yeah, so you made it all the way through to the boot camp. Tell us a little bit about Mable.
Yeah, so look, Mable's something that comes from personal experience. So like a lot of people my age, I had ageing parents, dad in his early 90s and frail, and mum in her mid-80s with dementia that was getting progressively worse, wanting to remain living at home. And so, you know, like many families, I had that experience of mum and dad trying to remain independent, with lots of challenges. So they did have some services through a big provider, which meant rostered workers coming through the house, which Mum and Dad found quite confronting. So we set up Mable as a solution for people like my parents.
Because not always the same person comes through, do they, when you've got these big organisations?
No, it's often a rostered workforce model. So that's different people coming to the house every day, and particularly for Mum who had dementia and was very anxious and uncertain about what was happening every day. That was very confronting for Mum and Dad. So one of the things that's very clear is that choosing who comes into your home and environment to support you is a very personal decision, and very important to your dignity that you can maintain control over those decisions.
Yeah.
That's what Mable's all about. It's about connecting people in local communities, those that need care and support to remain living independently. Yeah. We connect them with independent care workers, support workers, nurses, therapists.
And really interesting, I thought, was also you have a sort of record of the people that you're seeing, so that even if you do have somebody different come in, that person will have the knowledge to know that your dad, what career he had, or whether he'd been in the Vietnam War, or what. Yeah,
so I like to think that in the traditional model, that rostered workforce model, you lose the sense of who that person is and what his rich life history was all about, or my mother's rich life history. So in my father's case, born in England, served in the British Navy during World War II, immigrated to Australia after the war. Those sort of details were lost, and yet it's really the social connection and interaction that people are longing for. Yes. So it's not just about a daily job that has to be done.
It's such a simple and, sensible concept. You sort of think, well, why hasn't somebody thought about this before? I mean, are there similar Mables around the world, or how have you found it?
Yeah, look, I think that's a common reaction. People go, that's such a common sense solution to our ageing population, and the fact that people with a disability also need support. So let's connect people in local communities safely and efficiently and very transparently. And
keep them out of the sort of nursing home environment if they don't need to be there.
Yeah, I think for most people, they want to be living at home. I think it's the place where you can deliver the best outcome. It's a place where you can keep them safe. But you need new models and new ways of thinking to do that. So I think we've got the solution that I think works for catering for our ageing population going forward. And there are similar models starting to develop overseas, but we really started this innovation here at the same time. Innovations like this.
So is this a bit like, so you've got your customers are both your carers and then the people who need to be cared for?
That's right. Our platform's about delivering a better outcome to both the people that need the support and those people that are willing to offer it. It's about bringing people together via mutual choice, because the consumer chooses who supports them, the worker chooses to accept that engagement, and they can work it out in a safeguarded way. But that personal relationship that forms between people is really the foundation for good human services. Now,
you didn't win the whole thing at Pitch at Palace, so you're not going off to the Palace, but what do you want going forward in terms of growing the business?
Yeah, we just want everyone that's ageing and everyone that has a disability to know that they have the right to choose who comes into the home to support them when they come into the home, and be able to negotiate prices directly, and that this is a solution that can work for everyone. So we're about trying to bring that message out to the population. One thing about aged care and disability support is that they're mainstream community challenges. They touch many individuals and many families, and people are struggling with it, and there is a better way, and Mable is a better way of doing things, and we just want people to understand that there are other options. And when you look at the context of a Royal Commission that's about to commence next year in aged care, one of the things that it will show is that residential aged care has often not been the right solution for people, and people are wanting to remain living at home, but they need ways to be able to do that, and that's what we're trying to solve.
Well, I think it's a really interesting development, and it's mable.com.au, yeah?
Mable.com.au, and it's very straightforward for people that want to provide support or people that need support to get onto Mable and connect with each other.
Well, Peter Scutt, welcome to, well done for getting to Brisbane. That was really good, and wish you all the best. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Well, after the break, we'll discuss the post-G20 market moves with CIO of Forager Funds, Steve Johnson, next.
Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Well, trade tensions easing at the G20 summit on the weekend. China and the United States have agreed to halt additional tariffs in a deal that keeps their trade war from escalating. And so how did the stock market react? Well, for more, I'm joined by Chief Investment Officer at Forager Funds, Steve Johnson. Steve, this is certainly good news for some trade-exposed listed companies, isn't it?
Look, I think we were getting to the point where the worst was being priced in, and I think what...
A big sigh of relief.
Yeah, pretty much, but there's also a long way way to go here. I think it was very easy for someone to walk out of a chit-chat and say, we think this deal is great, and the Chinese to say we think the deal is great, but they can't even agree on what the deal actually was in terms of what's been announced.
But,
so,
I mean, look, BlueScope up 12%. That's a big jump.
Yeah, there was a trading update and a whole bunch of other stuff there today, so I don't think that was just trade related, and they were actually quite well placed. Australia being one of the few places that wasn't under the tariffs, they were quite well placed there in a tariff world to perform quite well. But I think that's a positive. I think the commodities, any of the Australian businesses that are exposed to the global economy, we've seen a very significant slowdown priced into stocks when we're not really seeing that big of a slowdown at the real economy level. So there's a lot of people looking at the tariffs saying it's going to have these impacts and therefore we're going to price Chinese stocks and anything that's consumer spending related down. So I think there's opportunities out there whether this happens or not, but you know, you've seen the market relief rally.
Yes, well exactly.
This, yeah.
Now look, the other big factor driving things is the oil price at the moment. What's that doing to investments?
Well, it's up a lot today. I think the market was up 5% or something in terms of the oil price today. It's been absolutely all over the place as Saudi Arabia and Russia agree some days and disagree the next days about what should be happening.
Well, there was that high five with Putin, between Putin and
and look, I think they will find a way to take a bit of supply out of the market. Like we saw a few years ago, it's not dramatically oversupplied, but the US shale producers have found a way to produce more than almost anyone thought possible. Interestingly, we had a guy from UBS at a lunch last week that we were talking to who was saying there were a lot of oil producers in the US tapping wells that they drilled ages ago because that oil price was at 80. They really turned the taps on. Everyone thought they couldn't get it to the export terminals, but they've been finding trucks and trains and all sorts of creative,
it is really
inventive ways to get it there.
How flexible they have been able to be, isn't it?
The question is how sustainable. So I think everyone's looked at that and gone, oh wow, it could be 14 or 15 million barrels a day. This guy is very, very pessimistic about their ability to produce that much, and that is going to mean we are going to need more supply from somewhere else. I still think the medium to long-term case is there for higher oil prices in the long term because the world is just not spending enough to find new resources. But that setup is a little bit less clear than it was to me 6 months or so ago.
Right, OK. Well, that's very interesting because, of course, it has knock-ons for our LNG business as well. Now, retail, in the lead-up to Christmas, what's going on with retail? And perhaps Reject Shop first.
Yeah, so they were out with their defence documentation today. They're under a takeover offer that's a very rare but quite interesting on-market takeover offer that's completely unconditional. Yeah, so most people come out and say, if we don't get to a certain percentage, we don't want it. If we don't get board approval, we don't want it. They want all these conditions attached to the bid. This is, we will buy anything that anyone wants to sell us at $2.70 a share, and we've got the capacity to buy the whole company. So it's unusual, and the thing that's unusual about it is if I'm a fund manager, this bid ends early January, I can sit there in front of that bid at, say, the bid's $2.70. I can sit there at $2.73, buy whatever the market gives me. I get to have a look at Christmas, and then if I don't like what I see, I just tip everything back to him at $2.70. So you're giving everyone in the market an option. But they've come out today and said our same-store sales are down 4%. In the latest trading, and that's pretty bad, and I think it's going to potentially scare people into taking this price. Well,
so the other obvious question is, isn't the Reject Shop model broken?
Look, interestingly, it's very, very viable overseas. There's a thriving business in Canada that does the same thing. There's one in the US. They don't seem to have made it work here. And Kmart has really pushed into that place quite aggressively and very strong on social media, and there's a different demographic shopping at Kmart than I would have expected 5 or 6 years ago. So they're putting a lot of pressure on. And when you think about all the players that have gone, it's consolidated down to the Reject Shop being the only one in that space, and they still can't make any money out of it. So I don't know that it is viable in Australia, but there's still a big business there at the moment. You've got something doing 600 or 700 million of sales a year. And interestingly, they put a number in their announcement today saying there's something like $1.80 of franking credits. And I think for the Jaminda family, the takeover offer here, there might be some strategic value in those franking credits as well.
Wow. Well, actually, you mentioned franking credits, and I'm just, you know, quite stunned at the boards around the listed companies now looking at share buybacks because of the potential for Labor to bring
election coming. I think you're going to see a lot of franking credits paid out over the next 6 months or so, and I think it's an interesting for someone who can really use them. So if you're a self-managed super fund investor, you're on a 0% tax rate. I think identifying those companies that have the capacity and are likely to do something over the next 6 months, looking at the BHP buyback that's on at the moment, I think there's lots of creative ways to think about maximising that benefit while it's there.
Really interesting space. Well, Steve Johnson, thank you very much for coming in again.
Thanks, Ticky.
Well, that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, Natasha Stott-Despoja, former Senator and Chair of Our Watch Australia. See you tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Or tonight, catch up at 10 p.m. Thanks very much for your company.